The first thing I noticed was the way the glass tower of Lawrence Dynamics caught the light. Morning sun scattered across its mirrored surface, creating fractured reflections of the city around it. London looked distant, almost unreal, as though I were staring at it from inside a dream. But I was not dreaming. I was wide awake, standing before the place that once represented everything my family valued and everything they believed I had thrown away. I pressed my palm against the edge of my uniform jacket, feeling the familiar firmness of the fabric. The insignia gleamed faintly, polished the night before with the same care I had given my boots and my collar pins. Small rituals of discipline that had carried me through years of deployments, negotiations, and crises. They also carried me here, to this moment, when the world I had built for myself would collide with the world I had left behind. The security guards at the entrance recognized my badge instantly. One of them, a young man with sharp features and wide eyes, straightened and saluted. His tone was crisp. "Welcome, Colonel Lawrence. Right this way." The words reached me like a strange echo, Colonel Lawrence. The name they had never spoken in my family home, the title that meant nothing at the dinner table, now opened every door in this building. I nodded, my face calm, though inside my stomach was a swirl of steel and fire. The lobby was just as I remembered from my teenage visits, though grander somehow. Polished marble stretched across the floor, high chandeliers glistened overhead, and glass walls revealed the bustle of the city outside. But beneath the shine, I could still hear the whispers of old memories. I had once stood in this lobby as a girl of 18, waiting for my father to finish a meeting, dreaming of possibilities I had not yet chosen. He had walked past me without looking up from his phone, Adrian at his side, already talking numbers and strategies. That was the moment I realized I would never be the heir he wanted. Now, decades of distance and silence later, I was walking toward the same elevators, my steps sharp, deliberate, unafraid. The ride to the executive floor felt longer than it should have. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked unfamiliar. The uniform added a weight to my posture, a quiet authority that contrasted with the uncertainty in my eyes. My hand brushed the folder I carried. Notes, strategies, technical evaluations. Every page was memorized, every line rehearsed. Yet it was not the data that made my pulse quicken. It was the fact that behind those polished doors, waiting with calm confidence, was my family. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. I stepped out into the executive hallway, where the carpet absorbed the sound of footsteps and the air smelled faintly of leather and polish. A row of tall windows allowed sunlight to spill across the corridor, and there they were, my father, Richard Lawrence. Even at 60, his presence dominated the space. His silver hair was combed immaculately, his suit fitted with the precision of someone who believed appearances were strategy. He was speaking with two executives, his hand gesturing slightly, his voice low but commanding. Beside him stood my mother, serene in her elegance, pearls glinting at her ears. She had always carried herself as though she were attending a gala, even at breakfast. Her gaze flickered over people like a surveyor marking territory. And then Adrian, my brother, the son of promise. He stood with a tablet in hand, flipping through slides, posture casual, expression confident. He had inherited my father's charm, my mother's poise, and the company's future. Every inch of him was prepared for success, and for years every story told in our household had been written in his favor. His eyes found me first. At first his smile was reflexive, the polite acknowledgement of a stranger approaching. Then his expression faltered. His gaze dropped to the uniform, traced the insignia, and his brows pulled together. The tablet nearly slipped from his hand. Valeria. He whispered my name as if it did not belong to me. "What are you doing here?" The words were louder than the hallway itself. My father turned, and for the first time in years our eyes met. Confusion registered in his features, followed quickly by a narrowing suspicion. My mother pressed her hand against her necklace, her lips parting in disbelief. I did not respond to Adrian. I let the silence linger, let the question hang unanswered. The weight of explanation was not mine to carry anymore. Before I could speak, another voice filled the space. Smooth, confident, practiced, Eleanor Briggs. She walked toward us with the authority of someone who had never been ignored in her life. Her silver hair was cut into a precise shape, her stride measured, her presence unmistakable. The CEO of Lawrence Dynamics. She was the kind of leader who never wasted time on trivialities, and yet when she reached me, her stern expression softened into something rare. Recognition. Colonel Lawrence. She extended her hand, her smile deliberate. "I had not expected you to attend in person. What an honor." Her words froze the air around us. My father stiffened. My mother blinked rapidly. Adrian's mouth opened and closed like a man who had lost the ability to form sentences. I clasped Aliner's hand firmly, the leather of her glove cool against my palm. I was in the area. I thought it would be useful to observe the session myself. Absolutely, she replied with a slight chuckle, her gaze flicking toward the gathering crowd. Your presence elevates this meeting already. And then, without hesitation, she turned to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who have not yet had the privilege, this is Colonel Valeria Lawrence, official liaison from the European Cyber Defense Council. She holds final approval authority for Project Aegis. It was as if the world stopped. The echo of her words rippled through the group. I saw executives straighten in their seats, whispering to each other, reassessing. I heard the faintest gasp from my mother, the tightening breath of my father, the sharp swallow of Adrian. The placard at the head of the table bore my name. Colonel Valeria Lawrence. Clear, bold, undeniable. I walked to my seat without glancing back at them. Not yet. The conference room was larger than I had remembered, though perhaps it only felt that way because every pair of eyes turned toward me as I entered. Sunlight streamed through tall windows that overlooked the city skyline, bathing the polished oak table in pale gold. Dozens of leather chairs lined its length, already occupied by directors, engineers, and advisors. Their conversations stopped as I walked in. I could feel the shift in the air, the way subtle curiosity hardened into recognition the moment they caught sight of my uniform. Some of them had probably expected a liaison from the council, but not me, not a Lawrence, not a daughter of this house. Their gazes darted from me to my father and back again, piecing together a puzzle they did not yet understand. Aliner guided me to my place at the head of the table, beside her own chair. My placard gleamed, the letters crisp. Colonel Valeria Lawrence. She motioned for me to sit, and I did, setting my folder neatly in front of me. My hands rested lightly on its cover. Down the table, my father and Adrian finally entered. They did not rush, but I could see the stiffness in their posture, the way their movements had lost the fluid ease of confidence. My father avoided my eyes, adjusting his cufflinks as though the angle of the gold links mattered more than the fact that his daughter now held authority over his most prized project. Adrian placed his tablet on the table too quickly, his jaw tight, his lips pressed into a line. My mother had taken a seat near the middle, her posture straight, her expression polite but unreadable. She looked around the room as if searching for someone to tell her this was all a misunderstanding. I let them settle before lifting my gaze. For years I had been invisible to them, my voice drowned by the endless praise for Adrian, my achievements ignored, my choices dismissed. But here, in this boardroom, silence served me. I did not need to demand attention. I had it already. Aliner opened the meeting with brisk precision. She welcomed the council representatives, introduced the agenda, and spoke of the stakes of Project Aegis. Her voice carried across the table, confident, rehearsed. Then, with a seamless shift, she turned toward me. We are fortunate to have Colonel Lawrence with us today. Her guidance has been vital in aligning our protocols with the council's requirements. Colonel, would you like to begin? Dozens of faces turned toward me. I rose slowly, the motion deliberate, every second stretching into the kind of silence that commands respect. My fingers brushed the edge of the notes I had prepared, but I did not need to read them. I knew every line. Thank you, Ms. Briggs. My voice carried evenly, not loud but steady, resonant enough to silence the rustle of papers and the shifting of chairs. I spoke of the Council's priorities, the global stakes of cybersecurity, the importance of vigilance against infiltration. My words were measured, my tone calm, but each sentence was weighted. As I spoke, I allowed myself one brief glance down the table. Adrian's face was pale, his usual composure fractured. He shifted uncomfortably, fingers tapping against his tablet, eyes flicking from me to my father as if searching for direction. My father, meanwhile, kept his gaze locked on his notepad, scribbling nothing in particular, the gesture more about distraction than record. I continued, explaining the upcoming evaluations, the performance benchmarks, and the necessity of flawless integration. Every eye followed me, every note was taken with care. I was not just another guest at this table. I was the one who would decide whether this project advanced or ended. When I finished, the room remained still. Then Aliner nodded with satisfaction. Thank you, Colonel. I sat down, folding my hands over my notes once again. The discussion shifted to the first technical presentation. Engineers began detailing encryption frameworks, data flow security, server resilience. Their voices trembled slightly when they addressed me, but I answered each question clearly, pressing for details, insisting on specifics. Halfway through, Adrian stood. His turn had arrived. As Systems Integration Director, he began, "I have overseen the architecture for Phase 2 of Project Aegis." His voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. He tapped his tablet and the screens around the room lit up with graphs, code structures, performance charts. He explained the rollout strategy, his tone rehearsed, his phrasing confident. But as he spoke, I felt the old familiar edge in his voice. The arrogance, the assumption that his words would always be met with nods of approval, that his place in this room was secure by birthright. When he finished, Alina turned to me. "Colonel?" The silence was thick. I leaned back slightly, crossed my arms, and let the pause stretch. Every second weighed heavier until Adrian shifted under the pressure. "Mr. Lawrence," I said, my tone professional, even neutral, "could you clarify how your proposed integration accounts for the latency thresholds outlined in the Council's last memo?" His eyes flickered, and for the first time I saw hesitation. Yes, we can revisit that section. You will need to. Those thresholds are non-negotiable. The Council will not authorize progression without compliance. Please submit a revised protocol by close of business Thursday." The pen in his hand slipped slightly, the sound of it clicking against the table sharper than it should have been. "Yes, Colonel." I turned my attention back to Alina, as though the exchange were nothing unusual. Yet in that moment, the balance had shifted. My father's eyes, though still averted, had darkened with restrained fury. My mother's lips pressed into a line of disbelief. And Adrian sat down, shoulders stiff, his confidence cracked. I let the next presentation begin, my expression calm, my posture steady. Outwardly, I was the image of composure. Inwardly, the fire that had burned in me for years flared higher. For once, I was not invisible. For once, silence belonged to them. The meeting stretched onward, but the weight of what had just occurred lingered in the room like an unspoken storm. Presentations continued, slides appeared on screens, voices explained protocols and timelines, but I could feel the shift in the current. Every director at that table now looked at me differently. Some with cautious respect, some with nervous calculation, and a few with open curiosity. My presence had disrupted the story they had all been told about this family, about who mattered. That story had always centered around Adrian, the heir apparent, the golden son. Yet here I was, in uniform, holding authority over everything they thought he controlled. I took notes as others spoke, my pen moving in deliberate strokes. My questions cut through generalities, demanded clarity, and each time I spoke, silence followed until someone scrambled to answer. I was not cruel. I was precise. Precision unsettles those who have relied on charm and confidence more than substance. Adrian's shoulders hunched further each time I directed a question toward him. He tried to respond with the same certainty he had rehearsed, but cracks formed quickly. A misstep in terminology, a hesitation in numbers, a glance toward our father as though seeking rescue. No rescue came. Richard Lawrence sat rigid, lips pressed tight, refusing to meet my eyes. Alina, for her part, seemed almost amused. She had seen power dynamics shift before, but perhaps not quite like this. She watched me with interest, her sharp eyes measuring not just my words but the steadiness of my posture, the control of my tone. When I offered a correction or a directive, she nodded slightly, satisfied, as though confirming that her gamble in aligning with the council had paid off. Hours passed in this rhythm until the formal agenda reached its conclusion. Alina closed her notes and stood. "Thank you, everyone. Colonel Lawrence will remain in close coordination with us during this critical stage. I expect full cooperation." Chairs scraped softly as executives began gathering their papers. The room filled with the murmurs of polite farewells, but I did not move. I remained seated, letting the tide of movement flow around me. People approached to shake my hand, to offer a business card, to introduce themselves with a careful balance of deference and curiosity. One director, a man in his 50s with a careful smile, said, "It is an honor to work under your oversight, Colonel. We have heard much about your expertise." I returned his handshake firmly. "I look forward to seeing results that match the ambition of this project." He nodded quickly and stepped away, relieved. Eventually, the room emptied until only a few remained. My father lingered near the door, his body angled toward escape yet rooted by pride. My mother stood close by, her expression fragile, her pearls trembling against her skin as though her heartbeat reached even there. Adrian remained in his chair, staring at the darkened screen of his tablet as if it might offer him words he could not find. Alina gathered her materials and approached me. "Colonel, thank you for your presence today. It made an impression that will not soon be forgotten." "The impression was the point," I replied. She gave a knowing smile, then turned toward the exit. "I will leave you to your family." Her footsteps faded, and with them, the last buffer between us. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. It was the silence of years, heavy with things unsaid, with judgments piled upon judgments, with the ghost of every dinner where my voice had been ignored. My father cleared his throat. "Valeria." His voice was steady but cold. "We need to talk." I rose slowly, gathering my folder, placing my pen neatly on top. My training kept my movements calm, even though my pulse had quickened. "Where?" "My office." His tone left no room for argument, though his eyes betrayed unease. We walked together down the hallway, the four of us moving as a single unit that felt anything but united. Colleagues passed by, glancing curiously, sensing the tension but saying nothing. When we entered my father's office, the door closed with a soft but final click. The room had not changed in the years I had been away. Heavy wood shelves lined with awards and photographs, diplomas in gold frames. A large window overlooking the city skyline, its view curated to impress. The desk gleamed with polish, a shrine to order and control. I stood near the center, hands clasped lightly behind my back, a posture of ease I had perfected in countless briefings. My mother took a seat by the window, her eyes downcast. Adrian leaned against the far wall, arms folded, jaw clenched. My father remained behind his desk, the high ground, though his fingers drummed once against the polished surface before he stilled them. "You have been a colonel for how long?" he asked finally. 6 months. 6 months, he repeated as though tasting the words. "And you chose not to tell us." "I did tell you. I sent invitations to the promotion ceremony. I sent articles, emails, voicemails. None of you responded." My mother lifted her head, her eyes glistening. We did not understand what it meant." "Colonel" sounded important, but you never asked." I finished for her. "You never asked because you had already decided my path was meaningless." Adrian shifted against the wall, his arms tightening across his chest. "We thought you were moving around base to base, never really going anywhere. That is what you made it look like." "No, Adrian, that is what you chose to believe. Last night you said soldiers just follow orders without strategy. You laughed while you said it. Did you ever think to ask what I actually do?" His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked away. My father's jaw flexed. "So what is it you want now? Public acknowledgement? An apology?" I shook my head. "I want nothing except what I have earned. Respect for my work. Recognition that I did not fail because I did not follow your blueprint." The silence stretched. My mother's hands twisted together in her lap. Adrian's eyes darted between us, searching for a path through the wreckage. My father looked at me as if for the first time, truly seeing not just his daughter but the woman who now stood before him. "You have built something we do not understand," he admitted at last. "That is on us. We thought we knew better." It was not a full apology, not yet, but it was a beginning. I inclined my head slightly, one step at a time. That night, long after the meeting ended, I returned to the hotel where I was staying. I placed my uniform carefully on the chair, straightened each crease, polished each button again though it did not need it. The ritual steadied me. Through the window, the city lights spread across the horizon. The skyline shimmered with possibility, with ambition, with secrets. I thought of my family, of the silence that had followed me for years, of the sudden recognition that now burned in their eyes. I had not come here for revenge. I had not come to humiliate them. I had come because it was my duty, because I had earned this seat, this voice, this authority. Yet as I looked out at the endless sprawl of the city, I allowed myself one quiet thought, one truth that warmed me more than the uniform or the titles ever could. For once, they finally saw me. The next morning, I returned to Lawrence Dynamics earlier than required. The air outside still carried the chill of dawn, the kind that wrapped around your lungs and reminded you that the world was awake whether you were ready or not. I stepped through the revolving glass doors, the hum of the building alive again with anticipation. Today was not a simple follow-up. Today was where I pressed deeper, where questions would reveal more than answers. The receptionist greeted me with a careful smile, her eyes lingering on my uniform with both respect and curiosity. "Good morning, Colonel. The boardroom is being prepared for your session. Would you like coffee or tea?" "Coffee, black, thank you." I made my way to the elevator, my boots echoing in rhythm. As the doors closed, I let my shoulders relax slightly, exhaling the tightness I had carried since the previous day. It had been a victory of presence, of silence turned into respect. But victories are fragile. Respect once gained can dissolve if you falter. I could not falter today. When the elevator opened onto the executive floor, the hallway buzzed with voices. Staff hurried with tablets and folders, their eyes bright with the urgency of preparation. At the end of the hall, the double doors to the boardroom stood open, and already figures were seated inside. I entered without hesitation. The room was brighter this morning, sunlight cutting sharper through the tall windows. Around the table sat directors, engineers, legal advisors, and external consultants. Their postures shifted subtly as I walked in, backs straightening, conversations halting. The silence of recognition had already become habit. Eleanor Briggs greeted me with a nod. "Colonel Lawrence, thank you for joining us again. We have a full agenda." "Of course." I took my seat, placing my folder neatly in front of me. The meeting began with updates on encryption modules and hardware security. Engineers spoke quickly, eager to demonstrate progress, but I heard the nervous tremor in their voices. They knew the stakes. They knew my signature determined whether this project advanced or collapsed. I listened carefully, taking notes, waiting. When one engineer glossed over latency issues in server replication, I raised a hand. "Excuse me, can you clarify your redundancy measures when server nodes face simultaneous high-volume attacks?" The man hesitated, fumbling with his slides. "We are still modeling those scenarios, Colonel. Model them faster. The Council requires proof of resilience against synchronized threats. Without that, the architecture is incomplete." He nodded quickly, scribbling a note. "Yes, Colonel." The discussion continued. Layer upon layer of technical jargon filled the room, but I sifted through it with ease. My years in the Cyber Defense Council had trained me to listen for what was not said as much as what was. Every omission mattered, every deflection revealed more than it concealed. Halfway through the agenda, Adrian rose for his presentation. He adjusted his tie, lifted his tablet, and began speaking with rehearsed confidence. As Systems Integration Director, my role is to ensure seamless communication between the encryption modules and the operational framework. He tapped the screen, and diagrams appeared on the monitors, bright webs of connections and arrows. I watched him closely. His voice carried the same polished tone he had used the day before, but now there was an edge beneath it, a strain that cracked his words. He knew I was watching him differently. He knew every slide, every claim would pass through my scrutiny. He outlined the integration phases, highlighting efficiency gains, reduced costs, and accelerated timelines. Around the table, executives nodded approvingly. My father sat straighter, his pride recovering as Adrian spoke with certainty. For a moment, the old narrative reasserted itself. Adrian the visionary, Adrian the capable heir. When he finished, Eleanor smiled politely. "Thank you, Adrian. Colonel, do you have questions?" All eyes turned to me. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch. Then I spoke. "Adrian, your model shows impressive efficiency, but can you explain how it addresses the Council's directive on latency thresholds, particularly in cross-border data transfer?" His hand froze over the tablet. His eyes flickered. "Yes, Colonel, the system accounts for that through load balancing algorithms." "Which algorithms?" He hesitated. "We are finalizing the details." "Finalize them now. I cannot approve vague promises." He swallowed, nodded quickly. "Understood." The silence that followed was heavy. My father's knuckles whitened against the table, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking between us. I pressed further. "Adrian, could you also explain the anomaly in your security logs from last quarter? The Council's audit flagged irregular data traffic. What measures have you implemented since then?" For the first time, true unease crossed his face. He blinked, his voice faltering. "That was a minor issue, a misconfigured test server. It has been resolved." A murmur rippled through the room. I did not move, did not blink. "Are you certain?" Because the anomaly coincided with a known infiltration attempt in the region. "If your systems were touched, even briefly, we need transparency." His lips parted, but no words came. He looked toward my father. My father shifted in his chair, his voice sharp. "Colonel, I am sure Adrian can provide a full report later." I turned my gaze to him, calm but unyielding. "Later is not acceptable. National defense does not wait for family convenience." The words landed like a blade. The room fell silent again, thicker now, charged with something unspoken. Adrian's face paled. My father's glare burned, but even he could not argue in front of these witnesses. Eleanor cleared her throat. "Adrian, please ensure the Colonel receives the full documentation by the end of the day." "Yes, Ms. Briggs." His voice was barely more than a whisper. The agenda moved on, but I felt the shift beneath the surface. Adrian's stumble had exposed more than he realized. And though the room returned to charts and strategies, I could sense the whispers building in every glance exchanged across the table. I remained silent, taking notes. But inside, a thought tightened like a fist. Something was wrong, something more than hesitation, something hidden. The meeting broke for a short recess. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, and muted conversations filled the air as executives stepped into the hallway to stretch their legs or check their phones. I remained seated, sipping the black coffee that had cooled by now. My uniform still felt sharp against my skin, every crease a reminder of the discipline that had carried me here. Adrian slipped out quickly, his tablet clutched too tightly. My father followed close behind, a hand on his shoulder as though guiding him towards safer ground. My mother lingered at the edge of the room, hesitant, her eyes darting toward me, then away. She looked as though she wanted to speak but could not form the words. I did not invite her closer. I stared down at my notes. The anomaly I had mentioned was not a simple irregularity. The council's database had flagged it during a wider sweep of regional incursions, but no definitive link had been proven. I had not planned to confront Adrian with it so soon, yet his reaction had confirmed more than silence ever could. There was something there, something he had hoped no one would notice. When the meeting resumed, the tension clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Presentations stumbled where they should have flowed. People chose their words more carefully, glancing toward me before speaking. I listened, asked questions, kept my tone professional, but I could feel the weight of my presence pressing harder with each passing hour. Adrian's turn came again when the integration models were reviewed. He spoke more cautiously this time, his sentences shorter, his eyes avoiding mine. He highlighted timelines, praised his team's dedication, and stressed the company's commitment to excellence. It was the language of someone patching holes, not building vision. When he finished, I leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Lawrence, one more question." His throat tightened. "Yes, Colonel. Your diagrams reference Module X47, correct?" He blinked. "Yes, that is part of our encryption relay." I slid a sheet of paper across the table. "This printout comes from the Council's last audit. Do you recognize the pattern in the highlighted section?" He looked down and I saw it. The flicker of recognition, the sharp inhale he tried to conceal. He nodded slowly. "That appears to be a system test." "It is not." The Council traced the pattern to an external breach attempt originating in Eastern Europe. The room went still. Adrian froze, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. My father shifted, his voice cold. "Surely you are not suggesting negligence, Colonel?" I met his eyes steadily. "I am not suggesting. I am asking for transparency." Aliner spoke before my father could respond further. "Adrian, please clarify." His jaw worked silently before words emerged. It was a temporary misconfiguration. A firewall bypass that was corrected within hours. "And you did not report it?" I asked. "We did not believe it was significant." "Significance is not yours to measure, Adrian. That is the Council's responsibility." He fell silent, and in that silence the truth pressed heavier than any admission. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. The reputation of Lawrence Dynamics, the credibility of its leadership, trembled in that room with every heartbeat. I closed my folder. "Documentation by tonight," I said firmly. "If I do not receive it, this project will be frozen pending investigation." Aliner's voice cut through the stillness. "Understood, Colonel." The meeting staggered on through the final items, but the rhythm had collapsed. Every speaker looked weary, every glance darted nervously toward me. Adrian kept his eyes fixed on his tablet, pretending to take notes that I doubted he would ever read. My father sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his pride bleeding silently across the polished oak table. When at last Aliner dismissed us, the exodus was quiet, subdued. People hurried away as though escaping the gravity of a star about to collapse. I stayed behind, gathering my notes carefully. My hands moved with mechanical calm, but inside, questions churned. Why had Adrian ignored the anomaly? Why had he chosen silence over disclosure? Was it arrogance, incompetence, or something more deliberate? As I stood, I noticed Adrian lingering in the hallway outside, speaking in hushed tones to a man I did not recognize. Their conversation ended abruptly when Adrian saw me. He tucked his tablet against his chest, muttered something, and walked away quickly. The stranger vanished down a side corridor. I walked past without a word, but the image etched itself into my mind. Back in my hotel room that evening, I spread the day's notes across the desk. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, and the hum of traffic rose like distant waves. I reviewed the Council's audit again, tracing the highlighted patterns with my pen. The breach attempt had been precise, targeted, and aligned suspiciously well with Lawrence Dynamics' infrastructure. Adrian had called it a misconfiguration, but misconfigurations do not look like fingerprints, and this one did. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. I had come here expecting family tension, old wounds reopened, respect won and lost. I had not expected this. A shadow larger than pride or neglect loomed at the edges of Project Aegis. For the first time, I wondered if Adrian's silence had less to do with fear of me and more to do with what he was hiding. The thought settled into me like a cold stone. Something was wrong inside Lawrence dynamics. And if I was right, the storm ahead would make today's silence feel like peace. Sleep came in fragments that night, scattered between the glow of city lights pressing through the hotel curtains and the weight of memories pressing through my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adrian's face in that boardroom, pale and strained, the way his voice broke when I pressed about the anomaly. I had seen soldiers lie under interrogation, diplomats hide behind layers of language, but there was something different in my brother's hesitation. It was not just fear of exposure. It was fear of consequence. By dawn, I had given up on rest. I dressed in civilian clothes for once, a simple suit with clean lines, nothing extravagant, but still carrying the precision of discipline. Sometimes a uniform announces your presence too loudly. Today, I wanted to observe quietly, to move unseen within familiar territory. I walked the streets of London for an hour before heading back toward the tower. The city carried the scent of early morning rain, stone and steel washed fresh. People hurried with umbrellas and briefcases, their lives absorbed in their own storms. I envied them, briefly, their distance from the battlefield I now faced. When I reached the tower, I bypassed the boardroom and made my way to one of the smaller offices assigned for visiting staff. The council had given me full access, a privilege I intended to use. I opened my laptop, connected to the secure network, and began reviewing the archived audit trails. The data told a story if you knew how to read it. Patterns emerged where others saw noise. The flagged anomaly aligned with a breach attempt that had probed multiple European infrastructures, but the Lawrence Dynamics servers showed a peculiar variation, a sequence of packets that mirrored internal testing signatures. It was as though the intruder already knew how the system was built. That knowledge should have been impossible without access, unless someone had allowed it. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. My thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the first time I had ever felt invisible in this family. I was 16, sitting at the long dining table in our home. My father was recounting Adrian's performance at a debate competition, his voice brimming with pride. Adrian basked in it, smiling modestly but glowing. I had mentioned, quietly, that I had been selected for a national science scholarship. The silence that followed was sharp. My mother changed the subject to dessert. My father never looked up from his wine glass. Adrian smirked, not cruelly, just with the confidence of someone who knew the narrative belonged to him. That night, I had decided I would leave, one way or another. The memory dissolved as a knock sounded at the door of the office. It was Alina Briggs. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, her presence filling the room. "Colonel, I trust you are finding the access useful." I closed the laptop slightly. "Very." She studied me for a moment, her sharp eyes calculating. "I know you and Adrian are family, but I also know you are not here to play favorites. You are correct." "Good." She leaned against the desk. "I will be frank. Adrian is talented, but he is reckless. He has never been held accountable the way you have. If there is a weakness in this project, it will be his doing." Her bluntness startled me, though I masked it. "And yet you promoted him to Systems Integration Director." She gave a thin smile. "His father wanted it." The board agreed. Sometimes leadership is about letting people reveal their own limits. I closed the laptop fully, meeting her gaze. If his limits threaten European security, then it is no longer an internal lesson. It is a liability. Exactly. That is why you are here. She left without another word, and I sat in the silence she left behind. For a moment, I felt a strange kinship with her. She understood the game of appearances, the sacrifice of comfort for strategy. But her words also added weight to my suspicion. Adrian was at the center of something more dangerous than incompetence. Later that day, the board reconvened for a closed technical session. This time, the atmosphere was taut from the start. My father arrived late, his jaw set in stone. Adrian trailed behind him, expression blank, as though he had spent the night rehearsing masks instead of solutions. We began with system stress tests. Graphs flickered on the screen, numbers ticking upward as simulations ran. Engineers explained results nervously, their voices quick, glances darting toward me for approval. Halfway through, I raised a hand, paused the simulation. The graphs froze. I pointed to a spike in the data flow. "That pattern, explain it." An engineer stammered. That is likely just an error in the model. I stood, walking closer to the screen. No, that is not an error. That is a deliberate probe. Adrian shifted in his seat. Colonel, with respect, you may be reading too much into preliminary tests. I turned, my eyes locking onto his. And with respect, Adrian, you may be ignoring what you do not want to see. The room held its breath. My father's glare burned into me, but he said nothing. Eliner, however, leaned forward. Adrian, provide the logs. Now. He hesitated, then tapped on his tablet, projecting a log file onto the screen. I scanned it quickly. The same pattern as before. A breach attempt disguised as internal testing. My pulse quickened. The pieces were aligning, and not in a way that favored Adrian. I kept my tone steady. If these probes continue, the council will have no choice but to escalate the review. Eliner's voice was cold. Then we must ensure they do not continue. The session ended in silence. Executives shuffled out, their faces pale. My father left without a word, his anger a silent storm. Adrian stayed behind, gathering his tablet slowly. For a moment, our eyes met, and in his gaze I saw something new. Not just defensiveness, not just arrogance, but fear. I walked past him without speaking. But inside, the questions burned hotter than ever. What was my brother hiding, and how much of it was already beyond repair? That evening, after the closed session, I walked through the city alone. The lights of London glimmered against the Thames, each reflection rippling like fractured memories. My uniform drew occasional stares, but I hardly noticed. My thoughts swirled around the look in Adrian's eyes when the logs were projected. That flicker of fear, raw, unguarded, did not belong to the confident brother I remembered. It belonged to someone cornered by his own decisions. I crossed a bridge slowly, letting the cool air wash over me. The city smelled of rain and smoke, of movement and noise. For a moment, I let myself remember what it had felt like to be 18, standing in almost the same spot, staring at the water and promising myself I would find a life beyond the Lawrence name. Back then, my father's voice had been the loudest sound in the house. He told me I was wasting my potential, that military service was for those without ambition. I had stood in the hallway with a duffel bag, my acceptance papers trembling in my hand, while Adrian watched from the staircase. He had said nothing, just smirked faintly, secure in the knowledge that his path was golden while mine was rust. My mother had kissed my cheek absently, already asking Adrian about his university interviews. That was the last night I lived under their roof. The memory stung, even now, yet it also fueled me. Every dismissal, every silence, every smirk had carved the steel in me. Without it, I would not be standing here tonight, watching London's skyline with the authority of a colonel. The next morning, exhaustion clung to my body, but I pushed it aside. Discipline is what carries you when energy does not. I returned to the tower in uniform once again, unwilling to give Adrian even a moment of reprieve. The boardroom was already half full when I entered. Conversations halted. I sat at the head of the table and opened my notes. The agenda today involved live network demonstrations. Engineers connected systems in real time, displaying security modules, response protocols, and automated defenses. I listened carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions. Each time the answers came slower, the tension higher. The shadow of the anomaly hung over the room like smoke no one could clear. When Adrian's turn came, his voice lacked the polish it once carried. He presented updates on system integration, his slides filled with diagrams that looked impressive but said little. He spoke of efficiency, of stability, of innovation. Yet the numbers on the screen betrayed him. Adrian, I interrupted. Can you explain the discrepancy in your throughput analysis? He froze. Which discrepancy? The one right there, I pointed. Data flows at 120% capacity during simulated breach, yet your slide claims stability at 95. That is a contradiction, he stammered. That must be a visual error. Correct it then. His fingers trembled as he tapped on his tablet. The corrected graph appeared, exposing a spike in system vulnerability. Murmurs rippled around the table. My father's eyes darkened, his jaw set like stone. Adrian tried to recover, but the room had already seen the truth. He was not flawless, he was not untouchable, and with every falter, their gaze shifted more toward me. Later, during another recess, I stepped out onto the balcony of the executive floor. The city sprawled beneath me, alive and indifferent. My hands gripped the railing as memories pressed harder. I remembered my first deployment. A remote base in Eastern Europe, bitter cold, equipment failing, communications cut. I had led a team of 5 through 3 sleepless days of cyber defense, patching networks while foreign attackers tried to break through every line. We had succeeded, not because of luck, but because of precision, discipline, and trust. My team had trusted me, even when I was younger than all of them. They had called me commander, had looked to me for decisions. In those frozen nights, I had felt more seen than in 20 years of family dinners. That contrast burned in me now, to be invisible at home but indispensable in war. The door to the balcony creaked. Adrian stepped out, his expression guarded. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Do we?" He flinched at the sharpness in my voice but pressed on. "You are tearing me apart in there." I turned toward him fully. "I am asking questions you should have been prepared to answer. That is not tearing you apart. That is doing my job." His jaw clenched. "You have no idea the pressure I am under. Father expects perfection. The board expects miracles. And now you pressure is not an excuse for negligence." I cut him off. "You ignored a breach attempt. You tried to bury it. That is not pressure. That is failure." His face reddened. "You think you are perfect just because you wear that uniform." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "I do not think I am perfect. I know I am accountable. That is the difference." For a moment, his mask cracked. I saw the boy I had grown up with, desperate for approval, drowning in expectations. But then he looked away, his pride snapping back into place. "This is still my company," he muttered. "No, Adrian, this is bigger than our family. This is about security, about nations that depend on these systems. If you cannot see that, you do not deserve the seat you hold." He glared at me, then stormed back inside. I remained on the balcony, my chest tight. For all my anger, I felt the tremor of something else, fear. Because beneath his arrogance, I had glimpsed real desperation. And desperation leads people to choices more dangerous than incompetence. That evening, when I returned to my hotel, a message awaited me in the council's secure inbox. "Colonel Lawrence, please be advised that the anomalies observed within Lawrence Dynamics systems show signs of internal cooperation with the breach attempt. Further investigation recommended." I stared at the words until they blurred. Internal cooperation. Not negligence. Not accident. Deliberate. I closed the laptop slowly, my reflection staring back from the dark screen. The suspicion that had been gnawing at me now had sharper teeth. And my brother's fear no longer looked like shame. It looked like guilt. The storm was no longer distant. It was here. The air in my father's office was heavier than the boardroom had ever been. It always smelled faintly of leather and old wood, as though he believed authority could be bottled and poured into the furniture. The window stretched across the far wall, framing the skyline, but the blinds were half closed, muting the light. It felt less like an office and more like a courtroom, and I was no longer just the daughter stepping back into it. I was the witness, the accuser, the judge all at once. Richard Lawrence sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on me with the same intensity he used to dismantle competitors. My mother perched delicately in one of the visitor chairs, pearls trembling slightly as she clasped her hands together. Adrian stood near the bookshelf, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes dark with unspoken words. I remained standing, posture steady, hands clasped behind my back. Military calm, they used to call it, but my heart was a steady drumbeat against my ribs. "You embarrassed your brother today," my father began, his tone measured but cold. "In front of the board, in front of a leaner. Do you realize what you've done?" I met his gaze without blinking. "I did my job." "Your job," he snapped, "is not to humiliate family. My job," I corrected, "is to protect national security. If that means exposing negligence in this company, even from my own brother, then yes. That is my job." Adrian's voice cut in, sharp and bitter. "You enjoy it, don't you? Watching me stumble. Proving you're better." I turned to him, keeping my voice calm. "I don't enjoy it. I would have given anything for you to stand tall today, to show the discipline and accountability your position requires. But you didn't." He stepped forward, fists clenched. "You think accountability makes you strong? You've just built walls around yourself so no one can see the cracks." "Better walls than lies," I said softly. The silence after that was suffocating. My father's jaw worked, his hands tightening on the desk. My mother looked between us, eyes wet, lips parting but no words escaping. Richard leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "You've always had a flair for drama, Valeria. Always making a spectacle when you could have chosen quiet cooperation." I felt the heat rise in my chest but kept my tone controlled. "I asked for cooperation. I asked for recognition. You gave me silence. So I built a life where my voice mattered. And you think this life makes you better than us?" His words cut like glass. "Not better. Just enough," I replied. "Enough without your approval. Enough without your blueprint." Adrian scoffed, shaking his head. You left because you couldn't handle the pressure. You hid behind the military because it gave you orders to follow, a structure you didn't have to build yourself. My throat tightened, but I held his gaze. I left because I wanted to fight for something real. I stayed because I earned my place. And every decision, every sacrifice was mine, not handed down like a family title. His eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I saw the wound beneath his arrogance. He had been handed everything but never truly owned it. And deep down, he knew it. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. Please stop, both of you. This is not what family should be. Family, I repeated quietly. I remembered years of dinners where my words dissolved into silence, years of watching Adrian celebrated while I was treated like a warning. Tell me, mother, when exactly were we a family? Her lips parted, but no answer came. My father slammed his hand against the desk, the sound cracking through the room. Enough. I will not let you tear this family apart because of your pride. My pride? My voice rose now, steady but sharp. You never asked about my deployments, you never attended my ceremonies, you never once said you were proud. And when I came back, all you saw was the path I didn't take. You built this family around Adrian's success and left no room for mine. The words hung there, raw and undeniable. For the first time, Richard faltered. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. My mother wiped a tear, looking at me with something like regret. Adrian turned away, his fists unclenching slowly. The silence stretched, heavy with truths long buried. I stepped back, drawing a breath. You wanted this meeting. You wanted to remind me of my place. But my place is not here, under your shadow. My place is earned, not given. And whether you acknowledge it or not, you cannot take it from me. I turned toward the door. My father's voice followed, softer now, uncertain. Valeria. But I did not stop. Not yet. The door clicked shut behind me, and the weight of their stares lingered like shadows pressed against my back. The corridor outside my father's office was quiet, lined with portraits of executives past. Men in dark suits, each painted with the same stern confidence, each frame heavy with the weight of legacy. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I walked, judging silently. I stopped, staring at one of the paintings. My father's predecessor had been immortalized there, his expression as unyielding as marble. It reminded me of the way Richard Lawrence looked at me, as if I was always failing some invisible test. I wanted to keep walking, to leave the tower and the suffocating weight of its walls, but footsteps echoed behind me. Adrian. He caught up quickly, his expression still hard, though his eyes betrayed something else. Not just anger, something frayed, uncertain. You don't get it, Valeria, he said, his voice low but urgent. You think this is about you proving yourself. But it's not. It's about survival. I turned to him. Survival of what? Of the company, of everything Father built. Do you think the board cares about your military medals? They care about contracts. They care about keeping this machine alive. His words carried desperation, and for the first time I saw how deep the cracks ran. Adrian wasn't just arrogant, he was terrified. And you think hiding breaches is survival? I asked, my voice steady. You think burying problems will keep the machine alive? He looked away, his jaw tightening. You wouldn't understand. Try me. He hesitated, then shook his head. Forget it. I stepped closer. No, not this time. You're hiding something, Adrian. And if you drag this company into scandal, it won't just be your legacy that burns. It will be Father's. That struck him. His eyes flashed, a mix of guilt and defiance. I don't need you lecturing me. You left. You forfeited the right. I wanted to laugh, but it came out sharper than I intended. I left because there was nothing for me here. But that doesn't mean I don't see what's happening now. And if you think the council won't uncover it, you're wrong. He opened his mouth, but the sound of approaching footsteps cut him off. My father appeared, his expression thunderous. Adrian, give us a moment. Adrian stiffened, then brushed past me, his shoulder grazing mine with deliberate force. He didn't look back. Richard stood in silence for a moment, his eyes heavy on me. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. You've always had a way of making people feel small. I almost smiled at the irony. No, Father, you did that. To me, to Mother, to Adrian, I learned it from you. His mouth pressed into a line. You think I didn't push you because I didn't care. But I pushed because I expected more. I met his gaze evenly. You expected me to be Adrian. For a flicker, his composure cracked. Then he shook his head, walking toward the window. The city stretched beyond the glass, alive and unbothered by the storm in this office. He placed a hand on the frame, his back to me. I built all of this, he said quietly, sacrificed everything. And for what? So my own daughter could stand in front of me and call me blind? I took a step closer. You sacrificed us. You wanted obedience, not children. You wanted successors, not lives of our own. His shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn. I lowered my voice. You asked what I want. It isn't an apology in front of the board, and it isn't some seat at your table. I just want you to stop pretending that my choices were failures simply because they weren't yours. He turned finally, his face drawn, older than I remembered. His eyes searched mine, not with anger but with something I had never seen there before. Uncertainty. For a long moment, we stood in silence. The distance between us was measured not in feet but in years of missed words. Then my mother entered quietly. She looked from him to me, her eyes wet, her voice fragile. We lost you once, Valeria. Please don't let us lose you again. The plea hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened, but I steadied my voice. I'm not the one walking away this time. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hopeless. For the first time, I felt the faintest crack in the walls they had built around me. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't repair. But it was a beginning. I left them there, my footsteps echoing down the hall. Outside, the evening light cast long shadows across the marble floors. I carried the weight of the confrontation with me, but also something else. The sense that the narrative was shifting. For years, I had been the daughter who left, the one who disappointed. The soldier who followed orders while Adrian carried the legacy. Now, I was the colonel who asked the questions no one else dared, and their silence had finally broken. Still, as I stepped into the elevator, a thought gnawed at me. Confrontations might shift hearts, but they do not erase secrets. And I could feel Adrian's secret pressing closer, like a storm waiting for the right moment to break. The night after our confrontation, I found myself walking through London again, this time without purpose. The city was alive in ways my family never had been. Neon signs blinked like restless thoughts, crowds surged and parted like tides, and the river reflected everything back in distorted fragments. My heels clicked against the pavement in steady rhythm, but my mind was anything but steady. I had spoken truths I had buried for years, and for a moment, I had seen my father falter. My mother's eyes had begged, for once, not for silence but for connection. Yet the air around Adrian was still thick with something else: fear, desperation, maybe even guilt. When I finally returned to the hotel, a sealed envelope awaited me at the front desk. No sender, just my name written in precise block letters. I took it upstairs and locked the door before opening it. Inside were printouts, audit logs, network trails, and a short note written in a hand I didn't recognize. Colonel Lawrence, your instincts are correct. The breach was not external. It came from within. Look closer at who had access. Trust no one. A friend. I laid the papers across the desk, scanning the highlighted sequences. My pulse quickened. These weren't the same logs the board had provided. These were deeper, rawer, less sanitized. The highlighted trail wasn't just a breach attempt, it was a dialogue. A back-and-forth exchange, as if someone inside had been communicating with whoever was on the other end. The note's warning echoed in my mind: trust no one. I sat there for hours, tracing every line of code, every timestamp. Adrian had been evasive, defensive, reckless, but could he truly be involved in this? My heart resisted the thought, but the evidence didn't care about blood. When I closed my laptop at last, dawn was already painting the sky pale. The next morning, the tower hummed with its usual energy, but beneath it I sensed unease. Conversations hushed when I entered. Eyes lingered too long before looking away. Rumors spread fast in corporations, faster when scandal loomed, and I was no longer just a visiting officer. I was the storm they all saw forming. I attended the scheduled technical session, though my mind was still on the envelope. Adrian was present, his eyes bloodshot, his movements stiff. He looked like a man running on fumes or guilt. The engineers presented new test results, numbers flashing across the screens. I listened, asked questions, but my attention kept drifting toward my brother. He avoided my gaze, his jaw set, his hands tapping restlessly against his tablet. When the session ended, I approached Alina Briggs in the hallway. I need to speak with you privately. She led me to her office, closing the door behind us. The space was minimalist, functional, every object placed with purpose. I laid the anonymous logs on her desk. Her eyes widened as she scanned them. Where did you get these? They were delivered to me last night. She read silently for several minutes, then exhaled sharply. This changes everything. It confirms my suspicion, I said. Someone inside is collaborating. She looked up, her gaze sharp. Do you think it's Adrian? The question landed heavy. I hesitated. His reactions make him suspicious, but suspicion is not proof. She nodded. Then we must find proof. We agreed to cross-reference the anonymous logs with official records quietly, without alerting the board. Alina promised to have her most trusted analyst handle the comparison. As I left her office, I felt both clarity and dread. Clarity, because the path forward was undeniable now. Dread, because that path led straight toward Adrian. Later that day, as I passed through the lobby, I caught sight of him in conversation with the same stranger I had noticed earlier in the week. Tall, sharp suit, forgettable face. Their exchange was brief, but the stranger pressed something small into Adrian's hand before walking away. Adrian pocketed it quickly, glancing around with the paranoia of a hunted man. Our eyes met across the lobby. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Fear. He turned away and walked briskly toward the elevators. I stood frozen, the image searing into me. My brother was not just faltering under pressure. He was drowning in something he could not admit. That night, back in my hotel room, I stared at the city until the lights blurred into streaks. My instincts screamed at me. Adrian was entangled in something bigger, darker, and he was in deeper than I wanted to believe. The question was no longer whether he was hiding something. The question was how far he had already fallen. The following morning began with rain, the kind that lingered like a second skin. Drops slid down the hotel window as I buttoned my uniform jacket, each motion deliberate. I had long ago learned that routine is the soldier's shield against uncertainty. Yet today, even that shield felt thin. By the time I reached Lawrence Dynamics, the tower glistened under gray skies. Staff hurried inside, their umbrellas folding like collapsing wings. I scanned the lobby automatically. Adrian was nowhere in sight, but the memory of his exchange with the stranger still gnawed at me. The day's session was scheduled as a restricted demonstration of the encryption core. Only a handful of people were allowed inside. Senior engineers, Alina, my father, Adrian, and me. The room was chilled, humming with servers and heavy with expectation. A young engineer began the demo, his voice trembling as he explained how the encryption core handled multiple intrusion attempts. Numbers flickered across screens, protocols danced in code, and at first everything seemed normal. Then, at the 23rd minute, the anomaly appeared. A sudden spike in outbound data, quick and sharp, disguised beneath the test traffic. My eyes narrowed. "Stop the demo," I ordered. The engineer froze, glancing toward Alina. She nodded. The screen stilled. I walked closer. "That spike, what caused it?" he stammered. It looks like an internal command." "From whom?" Silence. The logs rolled across the screen, line after line, until one user tag flashed red. Al01. My chest tightened. Adrian Lawrence. I turned, my gaze locking on my brother. His face drained of color, his lips parting soundlessly. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen in stunned silence. Then my father's voice cut like a blade. "Adrian?" Adrian shook his head quickly, his hands raised as if to ward off the weight of their eyes. "That's not me. That's a mistake. Anyone could have, the tag is unique," I interrupted. Each access point tied directly to user credentials. It can't be forged without physical access. His breath came fast, shallow. "I don't know how it got there." I swear Alina's tone was colder than steel. "We will need a full trace immediately." Adrian's eyes flicked to me, wide, desperate. "Valeria, you have to believe me." I said nothing. The session dissolved in chaos. Engineers whispered urgently, my father barked orders, Alina drafted a preliminary lockdown protocol. Adrian stood isolated in the corner, his mask of composure shattered. Afterward, in the hallway, my father cornered me. His voice was low, strained. "You've done enough." I met his glare evenly. "I didn't plant the evidence, father. You've been waiting for him to fall since you walked back in." I clenched my jaw. "I've been waiting for the truth." His face twisted with anger, but beneath it I saw something else, fear. He feared not just for Adrian, but for the empire he had built on his son's shoulders. That evening, Alina summoned me to her office. The analyst she trusted had finished cross-referencing the anonymous logs with the new data. Her desk was covered in printouts, highlighted in angry streaks of red. She didn't waste time. "It's real," she said. "The anonymous logs match perfectly." The breaches weren't just attempts, they were invitations. Someone inside was opening the door, and Adrian's tag, she exhaled, consistent across multiple instances, always him. The room seemed to tilt slightly. My pulse roared in my ears. I forced myself to breathe. What if his credentials were compromised? It's possible, she admitted, but unlikely. These access points required biometric confirmation. The words landed like stones. Biometric. It couldn't be forged. I left her office with the papers in hand, the rain outside heavier now. Each drop struck the glass walls of the tower like small, relentless fists. Back in my hotel room, I spread the evidence across the desk. Adrian's name, his tag, his biometric signature. But my mind refused to accept it. My brother was reckless, arrogant, desperate for approval. But a traitor. I remembered him as a boy, sneaking into my room after I had been scolded, offering me stolen biscuits as peace. I remembered him on the staircase, smirking when I left, but his eyes betraying something softer. I remembered the boy, not the man, and yet the man now stood on the edge of ruin. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, Colonel, or you'll regret it." I stared at the words, my reflection caught in the dark screen. The storm wasn't coming. It was here, and I was standing in its center. The morning after the warning message, the world outside looked deceptively ordinary. Commuters streamed across the sidewalks, coffee in hand, screens glowing in front of their faces. But for me, the air felt charged, every shadow alive with implication. I had been threatened before in battlefields where the enemy was visible. This was different. Here, the enemy wore suits, carried tablets, and smiled in boardrooms. I arrived at Lawrence Dynamics earlier than usual. Security at the tower had already tightened overnight, more guards at the doors, stricter ID checks hushed tension in the air. Word of the anomaly tied to Adrian's credentials had spread like a virus, and I could feel it infecting every corridor. When I entered the executive floor, conversations died instantly. People nodded politely, but their eyes told a different story: fear, curiosity, suspicion. My presence was no longer just that of an inspector. I had become the mirror showing them what they didn't want to see. The board had called an emergency session. Elinor greeted me at the door with a nod, her face unreadable. Inside, the directors sat rigid, papers spread before them. My father was already there, his expression carved from stone. Adrian sat 2 seats down, pale, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened. The chairman spoke first. "Mr. Lawrence, your access credentials have been directly tied to unauthorized communications with an external network. Do you deny this?" Adrian's voice cracked. "I do. I never authorized such access. The evidence is clear," another director pressed. "Multiple logs, biometric confirmation." Adrian's eyes flicked toward me, desperate. "I don't know how, I swear I don't." My father finally spoke, his tone low but sharp. "Then explain." Adrian's lips trembled. Maybe someone cloned my access somehow. Maybe the systems aren't as secure as we thought." I leaned forward. "The systems require live biometric scans. They can't be cloned." The silence that followed was suffocating. Elinor tapped the papers in front of her. "Until this is resolved, your access is suspended. Effective immediately." Adrian's face flushed, his hands shaking as he slammed the table. "You can't do this. This is my company." "No, Adrian," Elinor said coolly. "This company belongs to its shareholders and its mission, not to your ego." The words landed like blows. My father's face darkened, but he did not defend him, not this time. The session adjourned in a haze of whispers. Adrian stormed out first, his shoulders rigid, his movements sharp with humiliation. My father followed, jaw tight, silence heavier than words. I remained behind, staring at the abandoned papers. Adrian was being cornered, yes, but the anonymous note haunted me. "Stop digging." If Adrian truly was guilty, why warn me? If he was innocent, then someone wanted me silenced before I found out who really pulled the strings. Later that afternoon, Elinor invited me into her office again. She handed me a slim folder. My analyst dug deeper. "Look at this." Inside were printouts of network trails, but these were different. They showed connections not just to Eastern Europe, but to an offshore data hub registered under a shell corporation. The name meant nothing on the surface, but the ownership traced back to a holding company in Zurich. "Who controls it?" I asked. She hesitated. "That's the troubling part. We can't confirm. Every layer leads to another shell. Someone very powerful wants to remain hidden." I closed the folder slowly. "So Adrian is either collaborating willingly or being used as a cover." She nodded grimly. "And until we know which, we tread carefully." That evening, I returned to my hotel drained but restless. The rain had cleared, leaving the city wrapped in a cold, crystalline light. I poured a glass of water, sat at the desk, and spread the evidence again. Adrian's biometric tag, the offshore hub, the anonymous note, the stranger in the lobby. The puzzle was forming, but the pieces refused to lock together. Every answer led to another question, every path ended in shadow. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a location. Coordinates tagged with a time, 0230. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Someone wanted me to see something or walk into a trap. I weighed the risks, the training ingrained in me screaming caution. Yet instinct tugged harder. Answers don't wait politely. At 2 in the morning, I slipped from the hotel, coat pulled tight, hood low over my face. The city streets were quieter now, shadows stretched long under the street lamps. I followed the coordinates across the river, down side streets until I reached a warehouse district. The location was an abandoned loading dock. Rusted gates, cracked pavement, silence broken only by the hum of distant traffic. I checked my watch. 02:29. Then a figure stepped from the shadows. The same stranger I had seen with Adrian. He stopped a few feet away, his face partially obscured by the hood of his coat. His voice was low, precise. "You're asking the wrong questions, Colonel." My hand instinctively moved toward the inside of my jacket, where my concealed sidearm rested. What questions should I be asking? Not whether your brother is guilty, but who wants him to look guilty. My chest tightened. "Who are you?" A faint smile. "Someone who doesn't want to see this city burn." Before I could press further, he dropped a small USB drive onto the ground and stepped back into the shadows. Within seconds, he was gone. I crouched, picking up the drive carefully. It was cold in my hand, heavier than its size should allow. As I stood in the silence of the dock, one thought echoed through me, sharper than ever. This was no longer about Adrian alone. This was about the shadow that wanted him to fall. The USB drive sat on the desk in my hotel room like a loaded weapon. I stared at it for long minutes, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. Whoever the stranger was, he had risked exposure just to hand this to me. That either meant it was valuable, or it was bait. I prepared the way I would in the field. I powered up my council-issued laptop, one that ran in a secure, isolated environment. I inserted the drive with care, holding my breath as the system came alive. Files unfolded across the screen. Not random data, structured folders, labeled with timestamps. My heart beat faster as I clicked into the first. What I saw froze me. Video recordings. Not of external hackers, but of Lawrence Dynamics' internal servers. Surveillance logs showing Adrian's credentials being used, yet the man on the screen was not Adrian. The biometric scanner lit up under another's hand, a hand scarred across the knuckles, belonging to someone I didn't recognize. My breath caught. The next folder held financial records, transfers from the Zurich holding company into shell accounts, then into accounts connected to several mid-level Lawrence Dynamics employees. Names I had seen in the building. People who smiled politely when I passed them in the corridors. The final folder was the worst. It contained draft contracts, correspondence between anonymous aliases, all circling one chilling phrase: "Aegis will open the gate." I sat back, the room spinning faintly. Project Aegis wasn't just about defense. Someone wanted to twist it into a weapon. And Adrian had been made the face of the breach, the perfect scapegoat. I ejected the drive carefully, sealing it inside a small lead-lined pouch from my field kit. Then I leaned back in the chair, my mind racing. If this was true, then Adrian wasn't guilty, at least not of betrayal. He was guilty of arrogance, of negligence, of blindness. But the real traitors were deeper in the company, hidden behind layers of obedience and quiet smiles. At dawn, I walked into the tower with the drive concealed in my jacket. The air inside felt more hostile than ever. People whispered openly now, their eyes darting toward me then away. Rumors had reached a fever pitch. I found Adrian in his office, slumped at his desk. The arrogance had drained from him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. When he saw me, his expression hardened. "Here to finish me off, Colonel." I closed the door behind me. "No, I'm here to ask if you've been honest with me." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Honest? When has honesty ever mattered in this family?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Adrian, look at me. Did you knowingly work with external networks? Did you betray the project?" His eyes met mine, raw with exhaustion. "No, I swear to you, I didn't." Something in his tone, ragged, desperate, but uncalculated, rang true. For the first time I believed him. I exhaled slowly. "Then you're being framed." His brow furrowed, confusion breaking through the despair. "Framed? By who?" I hesitated. I wasn't ready to show him the drive yet. Not until I confirmed everything. Not until I knew who in this building I could trust. Instead, I said, "By people who want you out of the way. People who want Aegis for themselves." His face paled. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "God, I thought I was just failing." "I didn't realize you were failing," I said, blunt but steady. "But failing and betraying are not the same." The words hung between us, fragile as glass. Later that day, Aliner summoned the executive council again. Adrian's suspension had ignited chaos in the ranks. Investors were restless. The press had begun sniffing around. The boardroom pulsed with tension as Aliner presented the official findings. Adrian's credentials implicated in multiple breaches, his access frozen until further notice. Adrian sat silent, staring at the table. My father looked carved from granite, his silence speaking louder than rage ever could. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, her pearls trembling with each motion. When Alina finished, she turned to me. "Colonel Lawrence, do you concur with these measures?" The room's attention snapped toward me. I felt the weight of every stare pressing down. I knew the truth now, or at least a sharper piece of it, but revealing it here without certainty, without strategy, could destroy everything. So I nodded once. For now. Adrian flinched as though I had struck him. His eyes burned with betrayal, but he said nothing. The meeting dissolved into whispers and sharp exchanges. I walked out with my pulse heavy, my thoughts racing. I had bought time, but time was a brittle currency. That night, back in my hotel room, I plugged the drive in again. I replayed the surveillance footage, pausing on the scarred hand. I zoomed, enhanced, studied the curve of the knuckles, the faint tattoo just visible at the wrist. Recognition stirred. I had seen that tattoo before during a council briefing on rogue contractors. A mercenary group that specialized in infiltration, often hired by corporations willing to play dirty. Lawrence Dynamics hadn't been infiltrated from outside. It had been compromised from within, and someone was using Adrian as the shield. As the truth settled into me, I realized something else. Whoever left that drive in my hands was still watching. Still close. And if they wanted me to see this much, it meant the real storm had only just begun. The next morning, the tower felt different. It wasn't just the guarded glances or the whispers that died when I entered. It was something heavier, something electric. A company that once thrived on image now reeked of paranoia. Every conversation was hushed, every tablet shielded from sight. Adrian had not returned to the executive floor. Word was spreading that he had been confined to a restricted access suite on the lower levels. Security protocol, Alina had told the board, though I could see in her eyes that she was trying to protect him from further collapse or from himself. I spent most of the day cross-referencing the files from the USB drive against council intelligence. The mercenary connection was undeniable. The scarred hand, the faint tattoo, I had seen both in dossiers of a contractor syndicate called Iron Rain. Their specialty was corporate infiltration, leaving just enough evidence behind to frame insiders. And they were expensive. Whoever had hired them wasn't just dabbling in betrayal. They were investing in it. But the question still gnawed at me. Who inside Lawrence Dynamics had opened the door? Late in the afternoon, Alina called me into her office again. She closed the blinds before speaking. "Colonel, the board is fracturing. Some want Adrian removed entirely. Others think it's a setup. Investors are pressing for answers. If this continues, the company may not survive the quarter." I folded my arms. "Then it's time we stop chasing whispers and find the source." She hesitated, then slid a small envelope across the desk. "This came to me anonymously this morning." Inside was a single photograph. It showed Adrian in the lobby, speaking to the stranger I had already seen him with. The angle was grainy, taken from a security camera, but clear enough to make out the small device being pressed into his hand. The timing was marked on the bottom. The night before the breach spike appeared in the logs, Alina's voice was measured. "Whoever sent this wants Adrian buried." I nodded slowly, "Or they want us to think that." She studied me. "Do you believe he's guilty?" I hesitated, the weight of the drive in my hotel safe pulling at me like gravity. Finally, I said, "I believe he's being used." Alina leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Then you'd better prove it soon, because the board is preparing a vote to strip him of all authority." The rest of the day blurred into endless notes and cross-checks. I felt the storm pressing closer, every minute thick with expectation. By evening, I couldn't bear the walls of the tower any longer. I needed air. I walked the streets again, the city alive in its indifference. London had weathered empires, wars, disasters, and scandals. To the city, Lawrence Dynamics was just another name. But to me, it was the battlefield where everything converged: family, duty, truth. When I returned to the hotel, a message had slipped under my door. No envelope this time, just a folded page. "Colonel, if you want to see the truth, come to the sublevel archives at midnight. Alone." I stared at the words, the air in my chest heavy. It was reckless. It was a trap. But every step of this had been reckless. And every trap so far had only led me closer to the truth. At midnight, I slipped into the tower through the secured entrance my clearance granted. The building was quieter than I'd ever seen it, corridors humming with only the low thrum of servers. The sublevel archives were cold, lined with rows of steel cabinets and old data vaults. My footsteps echoed faintly as I moved deeper inside. A figure emerged from the shadows, the same stranger. This time, he didn't hide behind a hood. His face was lean, sharp, scarred across one cheek. His eyes held the cold patience of someone who lived on both sides of the law. You came, he said simply. I kept my stance firm. You've been following me, feeding me pieces. Why? Because you're the only one inside this tower who isn't owned, he replied. Owned by who? He glanced around, then stepped closer. By the board. By investors who want Aegis not as a shield, but as a weapon. My pulse quickened. And Adrian, a scapegoat. He's arrogant, careless, but not your traitor. I narrowed my eyes. Then who is? The man's lips curved into something between a smile and a warning. You'll find them soon enough. Just follow the money. Before I could press further, he slid a thin envelope into my hand. Then he melted back into the shadows, gone as quickly as he had arrived. I opened the envelope under the sterile archive light. Inside was a list of transactions, coded references to offshore accounts, all tied back to 3 initials, E.B. Aliner Briggs. The name struck like thunder. I stood frozen, the pages trembling in my hand. If this was true, then the woman who had positioned herself as my ally might be the architect of the storm itself. The list of transactions burned in my pocket as I left the archives. Aliner Briggs. Of all the people inside Lawrence Dynamics, she had seemed the most pragmatic, the most aligned with me. She had been the one pushing Adrian hardest, the one who claimed to see through his recklessness. If the documents were real, then she wasn't my ally, she was my puppeteer. I barely slept. The few hours I managed were fractured, restless, haunted by shifting images of my brother's face, Aliner's calm voice, and the scarred man's warning. When I entered the tower the next morning, I carried myself as though nothing had changed. My training drilled it into me, never reveal what you know until you choose the battlefield. But inside, I was calculating every move. Aliner greeted me in the boardroom with her usual crisp efficiency. Colonel, thank you for joining us. Today we'll review contingency planning in case Adrian's suspension becomes permanent. Her tone was steady, professional, yet every word rang differently in my ears now. If she was guilty, she was laying the groundwork to consolidate power once Adrian was fully removed. The session stretched long, directors debating replacements, investors' confidence, and the media narrative. My father sat rigid, his silence iron. Adrian wasn't present. His absence was a presence of its own, a void around which everything revolved. I waited until the meeting ended, then approached Aliner as the others filed out. You're moving quickly, I said. She tilted her head, her sharp eyes assessing. We don't have the luxury of time. If the company falters, so does the project. Or so does your influence, I thought but didn't say. Instead, I asked, and Adrian, her expression barely shifted. He's unstable. And unstable leaders get people killed. The words were precise, rehearsed, almost too neat. Later, I visited Adrian in the restricted suite where he was being kept. Security was tight, 2 guards outside, but they stepped aside when I showed clearance. Inside, the room was sterile, its walls bare, its windows sealed. Adrian sat at the desk, staring at nothing. When he turned to me, his eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse. So, what's today's lecture? No lecture, I said, pulling up a chair. Just a question. Do you know Aliner Briggs? Gave a bitter laugh. Of course I do. She's the one sharpening the knives. Did you ever notice anything unusual about her dealings? He frowned. She's always been ruthless. But unusual? No. Why? I hesitated. If Aliner truly was orchestrating this, the fewer people who knew I suspected her, the safer I'd be. Even Adrian. Nothing, I said finally, just covering every angle. He studied me for a long moment. You don't think I did this, do you? I met his eyes. I think you were reckless. I think you were arrogant. But no, I don't think you betrayed the project. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. Then find who did. Because if they can pin this on me, they can destroy you too. The words stayed with me as I left the suite. That evening, I examined the transaction list again in my hotel. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, all pointing back to initials that could only be Aliner Briggs. But a list of transactions wasn't proof. It was a thread, and threads could be forged. Still, I couldn't ignore the pattern. Aliner had been steering the narrative, pushing Adrian's downfall, and now positioning herself as the solution. It was a move straight from the council's playbook: destabilize, then control. At midnight, I received another anonymous message. This time it was just one sentence. Check the server room at dawn. Come alone. I was running out of reasons to trust shadows, but I was also running out of time. At dawn, I slipped into the tower again, moving quietly down to the restricted server levels. The air there was cold, humming with the heartbeat of the entire company. As I entered the main server room, I noticed it immediately. A panel left ajar, wires exposed. I crouched, scanning the access port. A small device had been clipped into the system, no larger than a coin, its lights blinking faintly. A tap-in module. External relay. the kind used to reroute traffic to hidden servers. Footsteps behind me, I rose sharply, turning. Eleanor Briggs stood in the doorway. Her expression was calm, too calm. "You shouldn't be here, Colonel." My pulse hammered, but I kept my voice steady. "Neither should you." For a moment, the hum of the servers was the only sound. Then she smiled, small and deliberate. "Be careful where you point suspicion. It has a way of circling back." She turned and walked away, leaving me in the cold light of the server room, the device still blinking like a quiet heartbeat. The storm wasn't gathering anymore, it was breaking, and Eleanor Briggs was standing at its center. The device in the server room haunted me all night. Its blinking light followed me into my dreams, each pulse a reminder that Lawrence dynamics had already been pierced from within. And Eleanor's calm smile lingered, the way she had walked away without fear, as though she already knew the outcome. By morning, I had decided I couldn't play passively anymore. If Eleanor was guilty, then silence was her shield. And silence had always been my family's greatest weapon. When I walked into the boardroom that day, the tension was visible in every face. Whispers had grown louder since Adrian's suspension. Investors were threatening to pull out, governments were demanding answers, and the press was circling like vultures. Eleanor presided over the meeting with her usual poise, guiding the directors through crisis management slides, her tone calm, measured, reassuring. I watched her closely, noting the precision of her language. She never denied, she never admitted, she simply directed the narrative. When the session ended, I didn't leave with the others. I approached her directly. "We need to talk," I said, privately. Her gaze flicked to me, sharp and unreadable. "Very well." She led me to her office, closing the door behind us. For a long moment, we stood in silence. The air was heavy with everything unsaid. I leaned forward slightly. "I was in the server room this morning." Her expression didn't change, and there was a relay device attached to the system. Still calm, she replied, "Then you know what I already suspected. This company is compromised." I narrowed my eyes. "And you just happened to be there too?" She smiled faintly. "You see suspicion everywhere, Colonel. That makes you valuable. But it also makes you dangerous." "Dangerous to who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the window, looking out over the city. "Adrian is falling apart. Your father is paralyzed. If this company collapses, so does everything it protects. Someone has to steer it through. And that someone is you," I said flatly. She turned back, her smile sharper now, if necessary. The conversation ended there, but it left me unsettled. If Eleanor was guilty, she was playing a masterful game. If she wasn't, then someone wanted me to believe she was. Later that afternoon, I visited Adrian again. He looked worse than before, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he rubbed his temples. "They're going to destroy me," he said, his voice cracking. "The board, father, Eleanor. Everyone." "Not if we find proof," I said. He gave a hollow laugh. "Proof? Against them? You think they'll let you get that far?" I sat across from him. "Adrian, I need you to tell me everything. Every contact, every meeting, every unexplained request. Anything." He hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice dropping. "The man you saw me with in the lobby, he wasn't a stranger. He was a consultant Eleanor brought in months ago, supposedly for efficiency audits. But he always came to me directly, asking for updates, offering shortcuts. Father trusted him because Eleanor vouched for him." My chest tightened. "And you listened to him?" Adrian's jaw clenched. "I wanted to prove I could handle it. I didn't realize until too late that he wasn't just auditing. He was watching, recording, steering me." I exhaled slowly. So Eleanor was his shield. Adrian's eyes flicked toward mine, filled with something I hadn't seen in years, fear, but also trust. "If you believe me, Valeria, then help me. Please." I stood, my mind racing. I couldn't promise him safety yet, but I could promise him this: I will find the truth. That night, as I returned to my hotel, I noticed a figure waiting in the lobby. The scarred man again. He motioned me outside without a word. We walked down the street, the city alive around us, but his voice was low, urgent. "You're close, Colonel, too close." "Close to what?" "To the one pulling the strings." "Eleanor Briggs," he hesitated. "Not exactly. She's part of it, yes, but she's not the architect. She's the bridge to who?" He stopped walking, his eyes hard. "You'll know soon. But understand this, the storm isn't about Adrian or even Eleanor. It's about Aegis. And when it breaks, the entire city will feel it." Before I could press further, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing alone beneath the neon lights, my pulse hammering. For the first time, I realized how small my circle of trust had become. Adrian was drowning, Eleanor was either guilty or being used, and my father's silence was a fortress. That left only me, and the storm was almost here. The next morning, the boardroom was more tense than ever. The directors sat stiffly, their voices low, their eyes darting to one another like conspirators in denial. Every word spoken was weighed against the looming collapse. Adrian's name had become a curse, Aliner's presence a lifeline, and my silence an unsettling mirror. Aliner began the session with her usual precision. She laid out the crisis management plan, restructuring leadership, reinforcing investor confidence, redirecting media narratives. It was seamless, professional, polished. Almost too polished. I sat through the presentation, my mind not on her words but on her movements. The way she glanced at my father before each decisive point. The way she measured her tone to calm the board while isolating Adrian further. It was not the behavior of someone reacting to chaos, it was someone guiding it. When the session ended, I stayed seated while the others filed out. My father remained as well, his silence carved deeper with every passing day. Aliner gathered her papers with perfect calm. I spoke quietly. "Why were you in the server room yesterday?" She looked up, her expression smooth. "I told you, to confirm what I suspected." And the relay device, her lips curved slightly. "You're assuming it was mine." I leaned forward. "Shouldn't I?" Her eyes flicked toward my father, then back to me. "Be careful, Colonel. Suspicion is a blade. Once drawn, it cuts in every direction." She walked out, leaving the weight of her words hanging. My father exhaled slowly, finally speaking. "You've turned this place into a battlefield." I turned to him. It was already a battlefield. I'm just not pretending otherwise. His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The silence between us was its own war. Later that day, I visited Adrian again. He looked worse than before, pale, restless, pacing the room like a caged animal. "They're going to erase me," he muttered. "Everything. My name, my work. I'll be the traitor they bury so the company survives." I studied him carefully. "Then help me find who's doing this." He stopped pacing, his eyes flicking toward me. "How? Tell me every meeting you had with Aliner's consultant. Times, dates, places." He pressed his hands against his temples, thinking. "He came often. Sometimes in the lobby, sometimes near the lower labs. Always when Aliner said she was too busy to meet me herself. Always with questions about the encryption modules." The pattern was clear now. Aliner had shielded the consultant, directing Adrian into his hands. It wasn't just negligence, it was orchestration. That evening, I returned to my hotel and retrieved the USB drive. I studied the video again, zooming on the scarred hand, the faint tattoo. Iron Rain. Mercenaries paid to infiltrate, to manipulate, to destroy from within. If Aliner was the bridge, then she had brought Iron Rain into Lawrence dynamics under the cover of consultancy. She hadn't just been steering Adrian, she had been feeding him into their trap. Near midnight, another message reached my phone. This one wasn't anonymous, it was from Aliner. "Colonel Lawrence, I'd like to speak with you privately. No board, no family, just us. Midnight, level 12, conference suite. Come alone." I stared at the words. It could be a trap, it almost certainly was, but answers rarely came wrapped in safety. I arrived at the suite minutes before midnight. The floor was empty, lights dimmed. Aliner was waiting at the long glass table, her posture perfect, a glass of water untouched before her. "Thank you for coming," she said smoothly. I closed the door behind me. "You've been busy." Her eyes glinted. "So have you." For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of truths neither had yet spoken. Then she leaned forward, her voice low. "You're asking the wrong questions, Colonel." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're looking for a traitor inside Lawrence Dynamics." "But the traitor is not just inside, it is above." Her words sent a chill through me. "Above," she smiled faintly. "Follow the money far enough and you'll find that this storm doesn't end here. The board, the council, the governments, they all want Aegis, and someone is willing to burn everything to control it." I searched her eyes, looking for the lie, but all I found was calculation. "Then why frame Adrian? Because he was easy," she said. "Too eager, too reckless. And because it kept everyone from asking the questions you're asking now." She stood, gathering her folder. "You're sharp, Colonel, but sharp edges break easily if pressed too hard." She walked past me, her perfume lingering like smoke. I stood alone in the empty conference suite, her words echoing in my mind. Above. If she was telling the truth, then Aliner wasn't just the bridge. She was the messenger of something far larger, far more dangerous. And I was standing at the edge of a storm that didn't just threaten my family, it threatened everything Aegis was built to protect. The night after meeting Aliner, I couldn't sleep. Her words pulsed in my head like static, not just inside, above. If she was telling the truth, then everything I had uncovered was only a fragment of a larger storm. By dawn, the tower was buzzing with tension. The board was scheduled to vote on permanent restructuring. Adrian's fate would be sealed, Aliner's influence solidified, and my father's silence would calcify into complicity. I walked into the building with the evidence burning in my bag, the USB drive, the offshore transactions, the logs tying Iron Rain to our systems. It was enough to raise hell, but not enough to end it. For that, I needed the architect. The boardroom filled slowly, the air thick with fear disguised as formality. Cameras were set up to record the session for archival. Investors watched remotely. The entire empire sat on edge. Elinor began the session smoothly, her voice confident as she presented the final steps of her plan. Adrian would be removed permanently. The company would pivot under her leadership. The project would survive. But her calm cracked the moment the doors opened and Adrian stumbled in. He was flanked by 2 guards, but his voice rang across the chamber, raw and desperate. "You think you can erase me? You think you can bury me?" While he pointed at Elinor, his hand shaking. "Hands the company to the vultures above us?" Chaos erupted. Directors muttered, guards tensed, and my father slammed his hand on the table. Enough, but I stood. "No, let him speak." Adrian's chest heaved, his eyes bloodshot, his voice breaking. "They used me. She used me. And you all looked away because it was easier to blame me than to ask who was pulling her strings." He reached into his jacket and tossed a folder onto the table. Papers scattered, covered in stamped logos I didn't recognize until I did. The council. I picked one up, scanning it quickly. Authorizations, covert funding, hidden directives tied to Aegis. Elinor hadn't just been acting on her own. She had been executing orders. The room spun as the truth landed like a hammer. It wasn't Adrian. It wasn't even Elinor alone. It was the council, the same body that had overseen the project from afar, that had demanded results no matter the cost, that had watched as families tore themselves apart to deliver a weapon dressed as salvation. I lifted my gaze, meeting Elinor's eyes. For the first time, her mask slipped. Not much, just enough. A flicker of unease, quickly buried. The chairman of the board stammered. "Is this true?" Elinor's smile returned, brittle now. "What matters is survival. The council ensures stability. Without them, Lawrence Dynamics collapses." My voice cut across hers. "No, without truth, it collapses. With the council, it becomes a weapon against the very people it was built to protect." Silence. Every face turned to me. My father's eyes burned with fury and something else, fear. Then Adrian whispered, "Tell them, Valeria, tell them what you found." And I did. I laid the evidence on the table, the transactions, the server logs, the Iron Rain connection. I painted the picture clear. The council had paid mercenaries to infiltrate us, Elinor had acted as their bridge, and Adrian had been their scapegoat. By the time I finished, the boardroom was no longer silent. It was alive with whispers, shock, panic. Elinor stood, her posture stiff. "You've doomed us, Colonel. Without the council, there is no shield, only fire." I met her gaze. "Then let the fire come. At least it will burn clean." The vote never happened that day. Security intervened, directors scattered, and the media outside caught only fragments. But the truth had cracked open, and no one could close it again. That night, standing alone on the tower's balcony, I watched the city lights flicker against the horizon. Adrian was broken, but no longer alone. My father was silent, his empire scarred. Elinor was gone, vanished before security could hold her. And me? I stood in the storm, carrying the weight of revelation. Because Elinor had been right about one thing. The council wasn't finished. They were above, and they were watching. The tower never slept that night. Sirens wailed outside as protesters gathered, demanding answers. News networks replayed fragments of Adrian's outburst and my accusations on a loop, each station spinning the narrative their own way. Inside, the board scattered into hiding. Elinor was gone, her office stripped bare in less than an hour. It was as if she had always known this moment would come. And maybe she had. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I felt the ground shifting beneath me. The council's shadow stretched too far, too deep. Pulling one thread had unraveled a tapestry, and now I stood staring into a void that no single name could fill. I returned to my father's private office near dawn. He sat at his desk, unmoving, the city lights fading against the horizon. For a long time, I said nothing. Finally, I asked, "How long have you known?" He didn't look at me. His voice was low, gravelly, since the beginning. The words hit harder than any blow. I stepped closer. "You knew Elinor was their bridge. You knew Adrian was being set up." His hands tightened on the armrests. I knew the council's interest wasn't just support, but I built this company on their contracts, their approvals. Without them, Lawrence Dynamics would have never risen, and without this company, the project would have died before it drew breath. My chest burned. "So you traded us, your children, for their control?" His gaze finally met mine, and for once I saw no steel in his eyes, only exhaustion. "I thought I could manage it," contain it, keep them close enough to use their power without losing ours. But Alina was smarter, faster. She moved before I could stop her. The silence between us was unbearable. All those years I had believed my father's silence was strength, a shield. But now I saw it for what it truly was, complicity. Behind me, the door opened. Adrian stepped in, his face pale but determined. He had overheard enough. "So it was you," he whispered, "all this time. Father, you handed us over." My father rose sharply, his voice breaking. "I did it for survival, for both of you." Adrian's laugh was hollow, bitter. "Survival, you chained us to the council. You made me their pawn, you let her," his voice cracked. "You let her destroy me." I stepped between them, my hands trembling. "Stop. We can't let them break us further." That's exactly what they want. But the damage was already done. Adrian's eyes burned with betrayal, my father, with desperation. The storm had entered our family, tearing at the last fragile bonds holding us together. I turned to my father, my voice steady. "If you stand with them, then you stand against me." For a heartbeat, silence. Then his shoulders slumped, and he whispered, "Then perhaps I have already lost you." Adrian looked at me, his voice raw. "What now, Valeria?" I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing: the council wasn't finished. Alina's escape wasn't defeat, it was strategy. She was the bridge, yes, but my father had been the door. The realization settled like ice in my veins. The true enemy wasn't just outside. It was woven into our blood, our history, our name. I left the office as the sun rose, the city bathed in pale light. Protesters filled the streets, demanding truth. Somewhere in the chaos, Alina was moving her pieces. And above it all, the council watched, faceless and patient. I was no longer just a soldier, no longer just a daughter. I was the last barrier between them and the world they sought to control. And if the storm was to end, I would have to burn through both enemies and family alike. Because the real revelation wasn't the council. It wasn't Alina. It was that betrayal had always lived in the heart of my own house.